Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, come on. Really?
Is anyone? Yeah.
Thank you. Like a little bit louder than that, right? Okay. I know we just had lunch, so I'll give you guys a mulligan for that. I'll let you have. So, welcome, and hopefully we will have a great conversation here. I would love to have questions from the audience, and I'd like to do something a little different. And instead of waiting for questions at the end, if it's okay with my fellow panelists here, that if people have questions, just ask the questions, because typically if we wait to the end, we only get like a few questions, and I want people who have questions to be able to ask them and have them answered. Again, our panel is on collaboration in a time of crisis, and these days, which is pretty much like every day. So my panelists here, who I'm going to let introduce themselves, I want to get into like why we collaborate, pitfalls, but also like some of the advantages of doing so. And collaboration in media is a kind of a newish thing, because that's always been like the knock that you don't like collaborate with other people, especially even in the newsroom, like within the same newsroom. Like if you were a reporter, you worked on your own stuff, and media organizations certainly didn't work together. And I think that has changed out of necessity, and also the need for some specialization that some organizations don't have, but others do. So with that intro, I'm going to let my fellow panelists introduce themselves, tell me a little bit about themselves, who they are, and then we'll get into the meat of our panel. So starting to my left here.
Hi, thank you so. Is it?
Oh, yeah, just turn it on. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Such a pleasure being here with all of you. My name is Ottavia Spaggiari, and I'm an Italian journalist. I'm based here in New York, and I'm a freelance journalist, and my work mostly focuses now on long-form and investigations, and I've done a lot of collaborations over the past few years.
Okay. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Hudson. I'm a senior editor at the International Consortium Investigative Journalists. I've been lucky enough to work on a lot of big collaborations, the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and more recently, the Pandora Papers. And I also got some intra-newsroom collaboration experience working with Ron at a paper in the mountains of Virginia, the Roanoke Times, where we did quite a bit about the coal industry and the timber industry, a lot of environmental reporting, and it was great collaborating.
Yeah, so Mike and I have a long history. We worked together almost 30 years ago, I guess, and then he was my boss at the AP. So, okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Motunrayo Alaka. I am Nigerian, and I run a center for investigative journalism called the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. I am the EDCO of the organization. We basically live on collaboration as an organization. We do a lot of facilitation of collaboration between journalists, between media organizations, between media and civil society organization, and we also facilitate collaborations for people who want to do cross-border collaborations.
Okay. Well, since you have the mic, why don't we start with you? Okay. Like, why collaborate?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's needed. That's the first thing. It's a need. Collaboration is a need. What has been established in the last 2.5 days is the crisis that we have on hand, the crisis within the media and the crisis in society. And what you do when you have the kind of crisis that we have, misinformation, crisis of sustainability, crisis of society with democracy, with governance generally, crisis of capacity media, depending on where you are on the globe. Where you get the extra from is from collaboration. So what you do not have, some other organizations have. Another reason to collaborate is the knowledge gap. So generally the media is supposed to know, but many times, and I have done a lot of media monitoring and a lot of interaction with media leaders, and many times the media does not know. And then the way to bridge the knowledge gap is to collaborate. So we do a lot of stakeholders meetings. And for instance, for 5 years, we concentrated on education and electricity reporting. And what we did for each of those projects was that we called stakeholders from government, from private sector, from non-governmental organizations, and we brought them in the same room with journalists to get nuance, so that you're not just reporting for the deadline, but you're reporting from a point of view of knowledge, understanding the issues, understanding why what you see is the way that it is, and not just assuming that it is that way, or not just going ahead to report because you have a deadline to meet, or you have, a screen to fill or a page to fill up. So the knowledge gap is there, and you collaborate because you want to be able to get that knowledge. Another reason why you collaborate is for amplification. So sometimes you've written a good story and it's important, but your reach cannot really help you to get the kind of attention that you need for that story. So you collaborate we've made media houses work together such that they decide on timelines, and when I publish, you republish, and so that cross-publishing gives amplification, and then the possibility of getting attention. And we're in an era of some level of shamelessness from people in government. I mean, that's our experience in Nigeria, such that you really need to shout it out loud to get attention. So when you amplify, you're able to get attention. Another way that we amplify is that a story can be written already, and then we take it to radio, for instance, as a discussion. So the story has been done, it has been published, then we bring resource persons to the radio station, and then they talk about the issues, and then they are phoned in. People can phone in, people can ask questions, and people are able to learn because you are collaborating. So these are some of the reasons why collaboration is.
All right, thanks. Let me bring in Mike, because ICAJ is sort of known for collaboration across the globe, right? So first, the same questions, like why collaborate? But then secondly, a question that I have for you too is, again, there is always this sense that competition drives good journalism too, right? So if you bring all these organizations together, does that sort of lure journalism, because we're all working together and we're not like seeking to, look, we're all journalists and we all are competitive and we all want to be better than the other organization, but does that get in the way of collaboration?
So I'll answer the first. I'll answer the first question first, and then. So I'm going to just read something really quick. I won't go on too far, but this is just something I wrote up earlier, just thinking about collaboration and why it's so important right now. We live in an age of lies, of big lies, and millions of little lies. The small lies support the big lies by creating a drumbeat of repetition that helps make the big lie seem plausible, and by fueling around-the-clock bedlam of deceit, distraction, and suspicion that makes it hard for truth tellers and lie debunkers to be heard and respected, remembered. It's this post-truth culture has helped divide news consumers into militant factions, ideological bubbles filled with people who only want to hear what they want to hear. Good journalism, enterprise reporting fights for oxygen in this polluted landscape. I think that's to some degree that's been true for a long time, but I think because of the delivery system now for the lies is so fast, so sophisticated, so global, it makes a difference. Long ago, more than 100 years ago, Mark Twain said, a lie can be halfway around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. That was probably a hyperbole in that era, but it's kind of true now. There was a 2020 New York Times piece that that was written in the wake of Donald Trump's acquittal on his second impeachment trial, which said people are numb and disoriented, struggling to discern what is real in a sea of slant, fake, and fact. Steve Bannon, the former head of Breitbart News and former chief Trump campaign strategist, who I think is he taking residence in a correctional facility, or did he get out on bail? He was charged like.
Yeah, I totally missed it.
Yeah.
But I know he turned himself in.
He turned himself in.
Yeah.
So, he said the real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit. And I think that the thing about collaboration is it's a tool for fighting that. When you publish with multiple news organizations, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds, however many, you create an event. When we did the Pandora Papers, we had 600 plus journalists and 151 news outlets from 117 countries, and it was impossible to ignore it. It became the #2 trending topic on Twitter worldwide on the Sunday that it came out, last October 3rd. Everybody was, all folks who weren't partners, like the New York Times and CNN and the Wall Street Journal, everybody was sort of forced to sort of pick up the story and grapple with it. By mid-December of 2021, the Pandora Papers have been cited in more than 30,000 news stories in the Nexus News Archive, most of which were not written by the partnership members, but by other folks who were sort of responding. And it really, had real impact. It triggered like more than 20 government investigations. It basically brought down governments in Honduras and the Czech Republic and spurred legislation all over the world, including the most significant legislation to reform anti-money laundering laws in the U.S. since the September 11th, 2001 attacks. So I just think it's, it doesn't cure all our ills, but collaboration is, especially for this media moment now, and I'm sure what's to come, is just a really powerful tool. So then the other question, Ron, you asked was about competition.
Does it stifle competition?
Well, it stifles the kind of competition which I think is kind of not that useful, which is the competition to get stuff first, the sort of tyranny of immediacy, stuff that's tied to sort of official events and official pronouncements. It sort of forces you to step back and think about other kinds of stories, because if you're going to do it, you want to think deeply and you want to think about longer trends. Gene Roberts, who was the former editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, he always talked about you want, the best stories are the stories that ooze rather than break, the stories that sort of develop over many years, economic trends, political trends that develop over day by day, week by week, month by month, and then suddenly your entire, the world and your lives to some degree are changed by it. Whether it's the change in, one of the things is the change in America. It took place over 3 decades, but going from where now we have sort of mega rich people and corporations are really sort of driving almost all the political donations, and it's, they're completely, was never perfect. It was, and they had a role if you go back to the 60s and 70s, but things have really changed, and it didn't happen all at once. There was a big Supreme Court decision that made a difference in that, but it really was a long project, just like the project to outlaw, to open the door to outlawing abortion in America. Right. That was a generational project.
Right. Okay. Ottavia, so you want to tackle like why should we collaborate in this time in particular?
So my perspective is different because I'm a freelancer,
Right.
And so I'm not a news organization.
That's great.
And I think that at this time it's particularly important for freelancers to collaborate, because for different reasons. So first of all, some stories, it's clear that cannot be done by a single journalist, especially when you're alone.
Right.
So, for example, I've worked on a couple of pieces recently. One was on the structure of the European anti-vaccination movement, and there was no way I could do that story alone.
Right.
And the other one was on the inequalities of the criminal justice system in 3 European countries, and how those inequalities prevented asylum seekers and migrants who were being prosecuted to have access to defense and fair trial. And for that story, no way I could have done that alone. And so there's that. And then there's also the fact that if you're a freelance journalist, very often, and you do investigative work, you know that you need other people, you need peers. It's really easy to kind of get stuck. You encounter so many roadblocks, and you need other people to be able to kind of like try to overcome those obstacles with. And finally, I think it's really, really important, it's also a financial reason. There are grants and there are resources for projects, collaborative projects in Europe especially, and for cross-border investigations. And so, like we're trying to find new models to be sustainable, and this is definitely one of those models.
Okay. Well, could you just unpack that a little bit more in talking about freelancers and collaboration? Like, what does that look like?
So in my experience, it looks like I come up with a story or someone else comes up with a story. The good thing about when you start doing it, you meet other people at conferences or online who are interested in your same issues.
Okay.
And so what happens is that you come across a story, you find someone else that might work on that story with you because of skills or because of their geographic areas of interest, and then you go out and you look for funding, and then ideally what I've learned is that it's always good to bring an organization like an editor on as soon as possible, even sometimes before finding funding, because I've experienced that as well. You have this great investigation, you have money for it, but then you are at a stage, you pitch it too late to media organizations, and so then you have this wonderful story, you have all these findings, and you cannot publish, which is something that I have a lot of freelance colleagues that have encountered this same obstacle.
Right. Okay. So, you all have laid out why we should collaborate and some of the advantages of collaboration. But let's talk about some of the issues. Starting one with logistics, and particularly, Mike, I want to start with you because, how do you manage something that's like global? And not only is it global, but you got like different languages, you've got like different newsroom cultures and standards. How do you manage that? And are you building that each time you do a collaboration? Or is that something that's sort of built into your workflow of the collaborative efforts?
We definitely, to some degree, are always evolving and building, but generally we have come up with a system. We have really good online tools. We have something called the iHub, which is, we sometimes describe it as an encrypted Facebook for investigative reporters, where people can go on and post stuff, and and there's a lot of curation going on, and a lot of ICAJ employees, including myself, but other people actually doing much more of this, going on and sort of encouraging people, hey, could you post, or somebody posts something, and say, is there a little more? Can you amplify on that? Or but a lot of it is just the most journalists, certainly of my generation, were trained that other journalists were your rivals, even sometimes within your own news organization, because they're competing with you for raises and promotions and the ability to do the best stories and fame and praise, etc. But what we found is that when you sort of give people a place to to gather and talk. And when you basically we have a couple key rules. One of which is we all agree to publish at the same time, at least the initial stories. And that, of course, takes a lot of the concern about getting scooped off of off of people's shoulders. And then the other thing is that we agree, as we're finding stuff, as we're reporting, whether it's within the leaked documents that we're using, or even outside them, you need to be posting that. You can't hold a big, great morsel, a great story, and a day before publication say, oh, by the way, this is, we have this. And that takes work, and that takes some encouragement and prodding people. And the reality is you're always sort of training yourself, and you're training partners, because everybody says, I love collaborating. I'm really in favor of collaborating, but not everyone is that good at it, or really really quite understand. I mean, we've had news organizations come to us and say, we want to collaborate with you. Give us all your data, and we'll write a story, and then we'll give you the credit. We'll mention your name in the story, and we're like, no, that's not collaboration.
Right.
So, but the cool thing is it really sort of the spirit of collaboration sort of takes over. Someone will post something, and I found our finance minister tied to this sketchy company in another country, and someone else will jump on it and say, oh, well, in my country our deputy prime minister son had some dealings with that company, let's talk. And then somebody else will come on and say, with that particular industry, you should be searching these keywords in the data. And somebody else will jump on and say, oh, there's an expert who knows about that industry and about that company, you should talk to him, and it really sort of snowballs.
Okay. So what about Nigeria? Because it seems like you would run into the same kind of things, right? Where you've got these different media organizations with different missions. Mm. Some people have, obviously you have different standards. How do you police that? And make sure that when you're collaborating, everybody follows the same rules. Mm-hmm. And what Mike was talking about, that you're all agreeing to publish at the same time. How do you do that? How do you hold that all together?
Okay, so it's important to have a strategy from the beginning, to have a plan, and to have a goal. So we can't collaborate on everything and anything, because the organizations are individual organizations running their daily stories, breaking their news, being media. So what we find is that it helps to have a goal or to have a mission that you want to accomplish. So for instance, I made an example of choosing electricity. We wanted to report on electricity, and so we brought like-minded people together. So it is important when collaborating to find people who are interested in what you are interested in, but also have the same values as you do. So we brought like-minded organizations together. We brought Premium Times, the Cable, Daily Trust. These are organizations that we know they are editors, we know they are ethical, we know that they care about enterprise reporting. So we brought these people together and said, let us report this issue differently together. So our role is a key role of being a driver. And many collaborations die because there is no driver, because it takes a lot to coordinate, collaboration. It takes a lot to follow up on timelines. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot to ensure that eventually we are able to, reach the goal that we want to reach. Mm-hmm. So having like-minded people together helps. And then it is also important to be able to map the resources that we have. Mm-hmm. Financial resources, but also resources in terms of knowledge, resources in terms of platform and the forms of the platforms that we have. So we have done things where we've published stories and then we take it to a radio station. Now the radio station's work is for amplification. Mm-hmm. They are not really part of the group that did the story, but they have a platform because radio is big in Nigeria and indeed in Africa. We're listening people. So we take it there for amplification and for discussion. So it is also important to be able to say these are the resources we have. Trust is extremely important in collaboration. Sometimes you're dealing with confidential issues, right, and you don't want the information to be leaked, right, before the publication day. So you need to have people in the room who understand the confidentiality of what you're doing and who are not going to be so itchy about getting a scoop.
Right.
And that's what I really appreciate what was said about the fact that, competition is so important for the industry and for anything. But the kind of competition that collaboration kills is the type of competition that we do not need.
Right.
So you're able to work together and trust one another to be able to deliver on the work. So it is at work, but it is also the fact that when you start with those ingredients of like-minded people, common objectives, goal, and then seeking the knowledge. So we always like to bring experts into the room. And personally, and working in the industry for about a decade and a half, I developed a model called RUSH, report until something happens. I've been developing it for about 10 years, and I am still working on it. It's a collaborative model strategy backed by technology, but it says that journalists should treat their sources as resource persons. So what's the difference? So when you're talking to a source, you just want their voice. Like journalists will tell, I want your voice. I have a story. I just want your perspective. And it is event-based. You just want to use it for that. But when you're dealing with them as resource persons, you're going for the knowledge and understanding of how do things work. How does the health sector work? How does this hospital run? What makes it run? Why are the lights on? Why are they off? When do the supplies come? You want to understand. And when we have that kind of person in the room, you are able to map the value chain of the issue. Because one of the things that journalists and editors don't have the time for is time to reflect. Right. You're chasing deadlines. You arrive there dead or alive, but you don't have the time to actually reflect and say, what does all of this mean? So what? So we bring experts in the room, and all we're doing is understanding the issues sometimes we do workshops where we're just understanding the issue for the first day. We just want to understand the ramifications. And then we can then do our story mapping. So while, the story will take you where it wants to take you, we also believe that it is important to strategize and to treat it somewhat like a science, like what exactly do we want to achieve this, and who are the people in the room, what can they do, what can they bring on board, and how can we leverage what we have. So together we decide on timeline. Like for the electricity story, we were breaking it on the day that Nigeria turned 60, which was 2020, October 1st. And then we were talking about why are we living in darkness for 6 decades, and so we had to plan that into it, and then we agreed on timelines. Who would publish what? It was a series of reports. Different reporters from different organizations took bits of it, but everybody cross-published. So for us, we drive that process, and then we follow up on others to ensure that we meet the deadline.
Quick question for you, because as you talk about this, I want to reflect back to something that Mike was talking about. How do you manage all of it? Do you have some tool that all your partners can access where you are all communicating? How do you manage that?
Okay, so right now it's all, we don't have a special tool that we're using. It's communication between people, and we keep the organizations. It's a small group, so we have sometimes we're working with 6 organizations, sometimes we're working with many organizations, but at different levels. So we can bring up to 50, 60 different organizations, government agencies, private sector, non-governmental organization, because we're saying that media does not exist alone. It exists in an ecosystem. So if media is going to resolve the challenges of itself and its society, it must do that in view of that ecosystem. So if we do a stakeholders meeting, it's a big meeting, so many organizations, but we're having conversations and we're learning. But by the time we get to story planning, we shrink, and we have fewer organizations now dealing with this nitty-gritty. We have people who understand the issues, editors in the room who are mentors, and who help to guide, the ethics of what is done, and ensuring that, the reporting is good. And then so we just have all kinds of people together, but it's a small group or a large group, depending on what stage we are in the collaboration. Okay.
Just talk to me about, in collaborations, in the way that you talk about with freelancers, who's the driver in that? And how does that person or persons organize that? And then the same question, keep on top of all of those things. Are you talking about a single individual sort of driving that, or are you talking about the individual and other freelancers and an organization driving it? Look, tell me, like, describe that for me.
Yeah, so in my experience, so first of all, the size of the team depends a lot on the budget that you can find, because of course, if you're a freelancer, you also have to fund your time and your work. And so in my experience, I've always worked with, as part of small teams. Very small teams, like 3-4 people, 2-3-4 people. Let's say that when you are more than 2, you need a project manager. So there's always a project manager. It's 3 people, it's fine. It's really easy to, when you are working on a complex story, if it's 3 people, it's very easy to have chaos. So you need a project manager, meaning that it's the person that sends out the emails, the minutes, the agenda for the meetings, and one, like the main rule is, it's very easy, like basic rules of project management, but after every meeting you send out an email, who does what, and you make sure that you're going to communicate always, meaning that and I want to go back to what you were saying before, not everybody is made for collaborating.
Right.
So you really need to make sure that you're collaborating with people who are generous and who are flexible and who are also very well organized. There are some tools that we have been using. So first of all, we use, I don't know if you've heard of it, but there are several other types of secure storage. We use Trezorit, which is an end-to-end encrypted storage, and we make sure that it's basic, but all our materials are organized by country. So, like core documents, FOIAs, the reports and interviews, everything has to be organized by country. And we also keep a grid, like an Excel grid, like for each country, so that we all know what we're working on and everybody has access to it. And the basic understanding when you work on these projects is that it's not your information, it's the team's information. So of course, and that is like not everybody's okay with that, but that is like so important. And yeah.
Okay. What was the tool again you mentioned?
Trezorit, but I know that I've always used Trezorit. Tresoit.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I may look into that. So a question I always have with collaborations is around the issue of power dynamics, right? Who gets to call the shots, and then how do you make sure that everybody's voices is represented, and then what happens when there are disagreements? Mike, you wanna start?
I think one of the key things that we do to try to make sure that everyone has agency within the project is we're not in any way telling people what stories to do. Like we're not saying you should do this or this is, we know that our partners know what's best for their news organization, what's best for their region, their audience, and so that's one way where people can kind of maintain a level of editorial agency. So what happens if there's a problem? I think often we find that there's a problem, and it's often I'm going to say my fault. Because this person did, there was a misunderstanding, and maybe this person who's fairly new to collaboration, again, says they are really interested in, and to some degree are collaborating, but there are little things where they're still like very walled off and protective, and I feel like I should have like spent more time talking to them and explaining the sort of what to them feels very strange and a little bit, you have to share this information with everybody. You have to share your sourcing with it. Obviously if you have a confidential source or a source who could be in danger, that's a different thing. But in general, like the sort of radical sharing is a hard thing for people to get.
Sure.
So part of it is trying to head it off.
Okay.
I think dealing with the problem is just like talking to lots of stakeholders and getting them together if you can, and talking it through. I mean, I can give you an example of sort of how it works. Like on Panama Papers investigation, we had a team from probably more than a dozen news organizations, about 17 journalists who were investigating sort of Russian material that we had in this big leak, looking at sort of Putin and the people and the companies and the banks around him. And they got together every week and they were sharing information, and there was a lot of brainstorming. It was very complicated, money moving around, where money would be, someone would get a loan and then the loan would be forgiven for $1, and it was like all kinds of stuff. And they they wanted to add it up because they wanted a big number, and some of the team said this is $2.9 billion, almost $3 billion. Other members of the team said, we think there's some documentation missing, and we think there's a chance that we may be double counting some of these transactions. We think it's really safer to say at least $2 billion. And went back and forth, but ultimately, if everyone is going to be publishing at once and you have one figure and someone else has another, so it becomes a way where the sort of the more, in this case, slightly more conservative figure, but still a big figure, is going to win the day, because everybody, no one wants to be sort of hanging out there on a limb and no one else is out there with you.
Okay, but who makes that call? And then what happens if someone says we're going with the big number?
Well, then we would have gotten involved. But in that case, it was. I think it was almost inevitable. Like, oh well, if most of us are saying $2 billion, we don't want to be hanging out there. So the folks who were advocating for and I think it was only like maybe one or two, within that group were advocating for the higher figure. We're sort of like it's social pressure, I guess you could internal social pressure, but not like somebody saying this is what you have to do. Okay. But if it did get to a point where they were still at loggerheads, then we might have someone had, our ICAJ's executive director, Gerard Ryle, he's a little bit like a diplomat where he sort of flies around the world and there flare-ups, there are problems. He talks to people, talks through stuff.
No, you're making those same kind of things, and when you do with all the media houses in Nigeria, and then what happens if someone doesn't follow the rules, right? Like, what if someone jumps the gun and just publishes?
Well, I mean, the story was for the public anyway. So I think that what was mentioned around the generosity of spirit is really important in collaboration. You have to bring people together who really love this work for public interest, who care about the overriding public interest beyond, their bylines, beyond their shining or getting special recognitions, that really do care about journalism and society. I think when you get that right, any misunderstanding would then be intellectual, to be debate around, should we understate because we're not sure, or, rather than personal issues, which can then be more messy. And we work with individual journalists too. We work with individual journalists to collaborate among themselves, and then to work with mentors to do stories. And sometimes the issues we have might be between a reporter and a mentor. Like, a reporter might tell a mentor, I've been covering this issue for 15 years, and you've just come now to tell me to do it this way. Like, this is my beat, and I know my stuff. And it's just the capacity to say, yes, you do know your stuff, but we are always learning, and there is always a chance that you can do this better. And what's the value of a mentor that you don't make use of anyway? So the capacity to be able to come in and be able to moderate those conversations. But what is key is that the power dynamics never happens in editorial independence. So even though we plan stories together, we don't tell journalists this is the story that you must write. No, we sit together to plan the story. We learn about the issue together, and the journalists pitch. They go ahead and say, this is a strong angle that we're seeing from this issue, and they go ahead to write the story. So that is really key, so that we do not walk to answers, because we've had issues where a reporter comes and says, this is the title of my story. and at the end of the day, the journey of the story does not equal that title. It's like, this is the title of my story. But you can stick to the title now because, the experience, what you found on the field was different.
Right.
So in that case, we're talking ethics, which, it's an important thing to not work to answer when
But
you're
how do you
doing
deal
journalism.
with that? Like I say, in my reporting that such and such minister stole this amount of money, right? But the reporting doesn't show that. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you?
I think the ethics of the profession dealt with it already.
Right.
If you're saying it, you have to have evidence to show, and that evidence needs to be
but
empirical.
it could be like a gray area, though, right?
Well, if
Like-
it's a gray area, then we're talking opinion, perhaps, and it doesn't have a place in what we're talking about. Opinion is a different thing entirely. But if you're doing journalism, we have to be able to see evidence of what you're talking about. And if it's something you saw on the field, you have to be able to describe it, and it has to be something that is not abstract that others cannot also see when they arrive at the same scene. So it is important that we keep true to the profession when
And
we're
everyone
dealing-
else is
Let me
sort of
just-
interrogating that information, interrogating, say,
Totally.
what about this, what about this? And
Yes, asking
yeah.
questions. So we need to be able, and that is why the team is so important. Bringing together so that you can call, for instance, if the journalist is not agreeing, you have an editor that you can call to have a conversation. Like we've done stories before that we supported, and an editor called to say we're not comfortable with this story. So we step it down. We say that is where our work ends.
Okay, Mike, you want to ask something?
So I just, jumping off some of those points, I mean, there is a struggle if you're bringing someone who's a beat reporter into a story. Beat reporting is very important. There are certain institutions that need to be covered on a regular basis, but there is, not for everyone, but there is a natural sort of gravity that sort of pulls you toward your sources, towards sort of you're talking to them every day. You're worried about losing them if you do a story. So, whether, I think we sometime when I was at the AP, there was always like, oh, well, your investigative reporter has something really good about this particular issue. Let's get the beat reporter on and they can team up.
Right.
And it sounds like a good idea, but often you find two people coming at it very differently, and the investigative reporter doesn't care about maintaining sources in the long run. They care about telling everything they can, every single fact. And so you have to, it's a hard thing to do, and I think it just takes, if it makes sense, if you're really going to get value added from bringing in a beat reporter, then I think you just have to know that, it's going to take a lot more work. You're going to have to spend some time talking about it ahead of time. How are you going to feel if this story gets your main sources mad?
Right.
Like, what do and I have to say, honestly, sometimes in those cases, the best way to do it is just to have the beat reporter maybe give background and talk to the investigative reporter, and then the beat reporter can kind of have plausible deniability when the story comes out. I don't know about that guy. That guy's a wild man. I can't control him. I have no. But me. You can trust me. So.
Okay. Well, let me ask a couple of more questions, and then I think we want to take some questions from the audience here. Let me do these two things. I know I said we could ask questions here, but I want to get this before I forget it, and that is the issue when you're working with all of these folks, right? Like there are disparities in like the difference. Experience, but also with the reporters that you're doing. How do you make sure that there's like a skills transfer, right, when you're collaborating with folks, so that you're not only just asking me to go help you report, but you're also giving me some skills that I can learn later, use later on down the road. Is that built in? I mean, any of you can take this. Is that built in when you talk about collaborations, or do you ask? Do you go back and see if your collaborators have learned from this or gained some type of experience from it?
Well, we have training built into everything we do, right? Like if we're going to do a project, one of the first things we do is is train, and we train in multiple languages.
Okay.
And part of it is like training, like, okay, here are this leak of financial documents. Here's the kind of things that we found previously that they seem to suggest. Here's how we have a training director, we have several reporters and editors who do a lot of, also part of their job is doing training and
Okay.
flying around the world, and sometimes it's in person, sometimes it's webinars, but it's got to be, especially for the larger projects, it's kind of got to be built into it.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do the same. We build capacity of reporters and talk about beat reporting. So we've had issues of, if you want to deal with an issue, we find that sometimes the journalists who have covered it for many years are probably not your team. We can use them as resource persons a lot of times, but sometimes there are times when you find that journalist who maintains a very high level of ethics and is on the beat and is able to really separate. But sometimes when you deal with, for instance, an issue of oil and gas, for instance, it's a bit that is very technical. There are very few reporters who can cover it.
Sure.
And so what we have done sometimes is just to disrupt. We bring in a reporter who totally does not understand oil and gas, and then we bring in experts who teach, who help the person understand the issues for the purpose of reporting. Because the people who reported are reporting for a long time, and some of them sometimes might be compromised. Some of them have their strong beliefs. They become advocates, and they're no longer doing journalism on that beat because they become very, attached to
Right.
the issues that they are reporting. So, for instance, one of the things we found for oil and gas and electricity was that there are very few female reporters who cover them. So what we did was to do a workshop that was just for female reporters who were very good at their journalism but did not understand the issue. And then we workshopped with them to understand the issues. And then we did human angle stories, which is a missing link in reporting
Right.
those issues because many of the stories are so technical, people don't want to read them. So we did an human angle kind of story around oil and gas, people who, had pipelines around their homes and maybe there is bunkering and then they're affected, human angle kind of stories around it. And we're able to, from that, get a female reporter who never reported electricity before, but now she's known as,
Right.
someone who reports electricity because, she went through that training.
Okay. So 2 minutes, and then we'll start taking questions because I want to have like about 10 minutes to really take questions. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think that in my case it's definitely different because as freelancers we don't have the capacity of training, but for sure. But I want to go back to the negotiation and what happens when you don't agree, because that's a big
Right.
issue when you don't have, like when it's all freelancers, right? And that's why you actually need an editor as soon as possible. But that doesn't mean that, and actually I think I want to go back to what you were saying, but about, like trusting other people and other people's knowledge on things. Like, for example, if I'm, and to the reporting process, like if you have strong reporting, then you really have something to go back to and say, this makes sense, so we can put this in the piece. There's we haven't found this, there's no way we can put it in a piece. But once you actually manage to work with people that you really trust, who are really capable, and they know their area of expertise. Sometimes I don't speak Greek, I've worked with.
I thought you were Greek.
No, unfortunately, I wish I could speak Greek, but I don't, and so I have to trust my colleague
Right.
on that.
Okay. Okay, let's just open it up for questions here. Do we have somebody? I guess I could just take the mic myself then. Oh, you got it? Oh, okay, cool. Okay. I'll do it. Right. Okay.
Thank you. Trust me, I won't be long. Just two questions. One, if you are concentrating on one report, let me say just one report, if we are writing about a minister who is a crook, with collaborating with other journalists, then if you do it in the segmented part, say somebody write about his background, his schooling, his job, and all the rest of it. If each reporter is responsible for one particular part of the story, then at the end of the day, one decides to pull out his own sector or his own section of the story, his own segment, after it has been done. What do? Do you rewrite the story or try to get somebody to do it, meeting your deadline? That is one question. Then the other part of the question is if you collaborate on a particular story with different editors, reporters, sources, and everything is done, then what about the angle of the story? Do you say, okay, newspaper A, radio station B, you can do this part of the story at an angle, sort of put it in series, but one becomes very trigger happy and decide to publish it before the deadline? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so, okay. Anybody want to handle?
Okay, so far what we've done is that we map stories in such a way that they are independent stories. So the stories can stand on their own, even though then there is, a whole series. So that it's not just a part of a story that a reporter has. A media house or a reporter would only actually have the whole story. So we've had cases where a media house did not turn up their part of the story. But, we had the story in many parts, so the other parts still went on. And the thing about collaboration is that, in my experience, is that even although a particular relationship does not work out, you have to take it in good faith and look forward to maybe a next that will work out rather than, have altercations about it. So what we've had is an organization did not meet up with that deadline, but there's another project where they performed well and they did well. So at the end of the day, it's for the common good. We're all working towards a better society. So it's the capacity to be able to take that in good faith, perhaps understand what we could have done better. Always for us, it is always to try to look inwards to say what could we have done better. To maybe we didn't prep well, maybe our timing, maybe we did not carry the organization around a lot, just so that we learn from it, and the next time we're doing it, we're better off.
Okay. And his other question, Mike, you want to take that?
Okay, his other question was about somebody publishing before, and I guess it's published.
Yeah, we've experienced that before, and the main tool you have is to say, we're not going to work with you anymore, or we're not going to work with you in the next. You may come back later, 2 or 3 years later, and say, okay, we're ready to work with you again, but that's it. And part of that is just making sure, if your collaborations are successful and do good stuff, then that becomes like a really valuable to be cast out. That should, you hope that hurts more than hurts enough where the pleasure of getting the scoop is doesn't rule the day.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Ralph Akinfele. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Ralph Akinfele, Professor of Journalism and Mass Communication. I'm former chair, Department of Mass Comm, University of Lagos, Nigeria. I concur with the panelists, i.e., that competition is key to collaboration. So also is the issue of scoop is key to collaboration, as well as the issue of trust is key to collaboration. Now, I have a question for 3 of you. What type of collaboration are we talking about? Is it collaboration for growth or collaboration for gain? What's your take? Collaboration for growth or collaboration for gain? Your take. Thank you very much.
Do you want to?
Okay, so let me start from where we ended about rules. So it's really important to have rules when you're collaborating, and to be able to do something like we're not going to work with you again if you breach the contract. So we can sue you. We probably won't fight you. So we have had journalists that we blacklisted for their conduct or for not keeping to.
So
we
that's why-
blacklist in our own organization and say when we're doing anything, we will not invite this journalist.
So that's why we haven't talked in a couple of years? I've been blacklisted? Oh, okay. Now it comes out. Okay.
Yes, now it's out, Ron. So we would say we will not work with you again because we can't trust you, because this is, trust is a currency here. We have to be able to be sure that if we've agreed on something, if something must change, then we must come together to also agree on that. And for growth or for gain, I'll say for both. So because collaboration is really good platform for learning. You learn a lot from one another. You learn from perspectives. I give an example. We were doing individual story projects, and there was a photo journalist, now late, Soyinka Adekarusi, who was supposed to do a photo story in the Niger Delta. And in Nigeria, the Niger Delta area is the area where there is oil. And there are also security issues. And so his plan, we did a pitch meeting where we asked, what is your plan for your story execution? And his plan was, I am just going to take a plane, I would get there, and I'll go to the communities, and I'll start taking pictures. And someone beside him said, you are dead. Like you just want to appear in the Niger Delta and start taking pictures. So, but for that meeting, you know, he would not have gained that knowledge of understanding the terrain and understanding that he had to go to that place with someone who understood the environment, who had spoken to the people, and they allowed him in, because when you get to those kind of areas, you're going to stand out as a stranger. And then, you know, it is really unsafe. So he was able to, he came back with fantastic stories, pictures about, you know, the issues that the people were going through, because he was able to gain that knowledge. So we gain and we do grow, you know, when we collaborate, but it's not that type of gaining where, you know, you climb on one another and hope you get there first, kind of gaining. It's mutual, it is helpful.
Okay. Did you?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's both, 100%. And again, like, it goes back to what we were saying before, like being generous. It's just being smart, I think, and being flexible is being more smart. And meaning that you really need to, like, what you're producing is not just for yourself, it's for your team. Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Musikilu Majid, editor-in-chief of Nigeria's Premium Times newspaper. Fortunately, I've worked with both Mike Hudson and Motunrayo Alaka. So I recall that once I mentored a story during a collaboration project, and the reporter ended up fabricating the entire story. And it was a story about saying a coach was sexually abusing the players, his players. And, you know, beautiful story. If you read it, you love it. But as I asked her to provide evidence, it turned out to be everything from the name of the coach to the players to the places where it happened was fabricated. So I just wanted
But it was good writing, though.
Oh, good writing, good fiction writing. And you know what? So we didn't publish, and the reporter took the story elsewhere, and it was published, and she was nominated for the CNN African Journalist of the Year award.
Wow.
So it took a bit of intervention by a newsroom to say, ask her for evidence. So she would have been honored on the large stage for falsehood. I just wanted to share that when you are dealing with, but that's not my own question for the panelists. I just want to add one perspective that I haven't had from the panelists. It's about how collaboration really helps journalistic safety and helps you to avoid lawsuits.
Okay.
Now, and remember when we did the last project about the Pandora Papers, we collaborated with some colleagues in the UK. So we look at the laws of the UK and Nigerian law. And there were things, because we were talking about, you know, people who procured properties, who had hidden properties using offshore companies in the UK. And we saw that there could be privacy issues in the UK if the properties were identified. In Nigeria, there was no such issues. So we went ahead, they wrote their version of the story, they considered safe for their jurisdiction, and we went ahead to tell our own story in line with our jurisdiction. And the story was told, and it made a huge impact. Now the UK government is trying to say, look, you must disclose the owners of whichever company owns property in the UK. That's a huge impact for us. Also, for instance, when we were doing the Panama Papers, it affected a lot of Nigerian top politicians. And we knew when you are doing project with ICIJ, there are usually time to contact the subject of your stories. It can take a month or 2 months or 3 months before publication. We realized that if we contact them from Nigeria, anything could happen. The reporter could be killed, could be attacked. You know, they could preempt the story by issuing statements and all of that. What did we do? We got the ICIJ to telephone them and write them letters. So until when the story was published, that they saw that this was a collaboration by a collaborative project by ICIJ involving a local newspaper in Nigeria. And that saved us a lot of trouble. So collaboration can help. If there is a story that can endanger your life in your country, you can simply collaborate with another colleague as well, rather than allow the story to die. I just wanted to add that perspective.
All right, thank you. I think back here and then up front, we got time for probably 2 more questions. So, may stretch it to 3.
Thanks. My name's Tanya Pamploni, and I worked a lot in South Africa. For Motunrayo, I thought it was really interesting you talking about collaboration outside of journalism, like journalists rather, with like civil society and academia. And I mean, I'm interested in like that level of collaboration with them because they hold the expertise. And I'm curious, you know, it almost sounded like you're taking it past the source issue, like having them at the table, which I completely agree with. And I wonder what the other two, Michael and Ottavia, what you think about that. And also curious, Motunrayo, how far you go with that collaboration.
So you guys want to respond to that, and then you could.
So I don't know if I'm gonna respond correctly to your question, but I was a fellow here at Columbia Journalism School at the Global Migration Project. And one of the great thing that I learned while I was here was actually kind of like tapping into the resources of Columbia University and going to speak to experts about potential stories, even before getting into the story. So I think that especially with academics, lawyers, like technical stuff that otherwise you would not be able to kind of like even understand, it is so essential for me to go and talk to academics and experts like of any kind, for sure. It's extremely important to me. And I loved what you said before about the rush. That is genius. I'm gonna use that for sure.
Same here. I mean, for a lot of the stories we do, where we have secret documents, we've developed sources, experts over the years that we trust. We know they're not going to go off and tell other people about it, especially before we publish. And I think with some experts, like we will have them sign a non-disclosure, an agreement not to say anything to anybody else, and we'll give them documents and have them actually read the, we have some expertise. We actually now, one of my colleagues, Will Fitzgibbon, went ahead and took the course, and he is now a certified anti-money laundering specialist. He could go work at Citibank or J.P. Morgan as an anti-money laundering expert. But we have that expertise, but we also reach out to people, and it's really crucial to what we do.
Yes, so for us it is just ensuring that we have nuance in stories, because if you just follow stories as the break, and you follow them just as deadline, and you might not get the full perspective. And sometimes we forget that our work as journalists is as much to inform and to educate as it is to hold powers accountable. So what those groups of people help us to do is to ensure that we can understand what we're reporting better. But it can be tricky. It can be tricky in the sense that sometimes the advocates also then regard the journalist as their reporter, their PR, and then if something were to happen and you reported it, they could be really upset with you, which we try to educate everyone when we're starting a workshop like that this is what journalism is, this is what we do, and this is what it is not. We're not witch hunters, but our bias is to the truth. So if you had come in as an expert and we learned from you, if you've done, if you've breached a law, then we report it. It's just the work that we do. But there's a lot of value in academia. There's a lot of value in even pressure groups, in people who work in community-based organizations. There's a lot of knowledge of the streets that these groups of people have, and it helps that journalists are able to listen to them, not to write a story, but just to learn.
So let me.
Can I just say this one thing about, there's so much great resources, the NGOs and advocacy groups, pressure groups. I mean, I will say that you have to be careful with them because they need scrutiny too. When I was writing years ago about the subprime mortgage industry in America and sort of the predatory lending, all the groups that you would expect to have been, sort of fighting against this trend, the National Fair Housing Alliance, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, they were all taking money, getting big donations from the big lenders who were being proactive, trying to blunt the voices against them. And in some cases was almost like a shakedown scheme where there would be a group that would sort of stage protest against a big bank, and then they would have a meeting and the bank would agree to funnel $1 billion in loans through their organization, which they could dole out to people in their neighborhoods. So you just have to be careful with NGOs, and sometimes they deserve investigative scrutiny.
So let me.
Ron, just a moment, please. I just wanted to say something to that because it's so important. So what we try to do is not to approach them as a group. What we try to do is to identify somebody who knows so much, but who is, as much as we know, credible to come speak. So even for BEAT, we don't go to associations to say associations reporting education, for instance. Okay. We try not to do that because you can get sucked into some other organization or structural issues that you don't want to meddle with. But we try to identify individuals who love society, who are passionate about the issues, and who know to come and speak to journalists. And we always tell journalists that these are sources and you must verify sources. Okay.
Okay, so let me take this last question here, and then the panelists, you guys will still be around for a bit, right? Okay, so let me take the last question. It was that gentleman there, and then, I'm sorry, but they will still be around. Okay.
Hi, my name is Jake Conley. I'm a student here at Columbia right now. I'm a fellow at the Spiel Center for Investigative Journalism. Thank you all so much for speaking. My question, when you're working on really big projects, especially like the work ICIJ does with the Pandora Papers, the Panama Papers, those stories have so much data, so many documents, so many people involved, so many leads. You could spend 20 years reporting out that story and never hit publish. So how do you know when you're done? And how do you make that decision to say we have enough, we've done enough, we can't do everything, we need to publish now?
So let me let one of you answer that, and then okay.
I mean, our projects take a long time, but we also know at a certain point you just got to publish. So usually it takes 6 months to a year or even 18 months. We set deadlines. The truth is sometimes those deadlines then get pushed another couple months, but by setting deadlines and sort of everyone having an agreement, this is when it's going to run, everybody's working toward that, and then we sort of assess the situation. And if many folks are still running behind or feeling like they need more reporting time because of the complexity of the issues, then we'll find a way to push the it's, it's a balancing act between wanting to have the time to do it really well, but also not writing a book, not spending, 20 years on it.
Well, listen, a hand for the panelists. Thank you all so much. And listen, I know there were other questions, and I'm really sorry, but the panelists will still be around for a little bit, and they're semi-approachable people. I'm joking. No, they're approachable folks, so feel free to reach out to them. All right, thank you, everybody.